Now, the mutual admiration Mr. Trump has been enjoying in Beijing is not extending to Pyongyang. People there are furious over Mr. Trump's speech in Seoul Wednesday, where he called North Korea, quote, a hell no person deserves.
CNN is the only U.S. network reporting from Pyongyang during Mr. Trump's trip, and that's where our Will Ripley has been hearing, well, a bit of an earful about the speech in the streets. Yesterday we were talking to you at this time, and you were waiting for the newspaper to come out. You got the newspaper, you got the response, you took it to the streets. What did you hear?
Well, it's interesting, you know, whenever we cover these major outside news events inside North Korea, because the news cycle is slower here, people often don't learn about things until at least 24 hours after. And in the case of President Trump's speech, not only did they not even find out about the speech until he was already in China, but state media barely mentioned it. They said that he gave a speech, but they didn't reveal what he said. All they talked about were the protests that were happening against the president in South Korea. But we were allowed, and this is pretty unusual, to actually go and tell people what President Trump said. Here's their response.
In North Korea, where the news is under strict government control, state media gave only a brief mention of President Trump's speech at the South Korean National Assembly. No details of his scathing indictment of North Korean human rights and harsh words for their supreme leader, Kim Jong-un.
North Korea is not the paradise your grandfather envisioned. It is a hell that no person deserves.
Despite heavy restrictions on the flow of information, our government guides allow us to tell Pyongyang citizens exactly what Trump said. That's absurd, says housewife Ri Young-hee. The reality here is very different. We're leading a happy life, and we enjoy exclusive rights.
When you say you have rights that people don't have outside of North Korea, what do you mean by that?
One example is our outstanding leader, Marshal Kim Jong-un. She says he's leading us to a better future. Trump has no place to talk about human rights. He's a simple war maniac. Her answer echoes North Korea's leading newspaper, which called President Trump's words, quote, warmongering, filthy rhetoric spewing out of his snout like garbage that reeks of gunpowder to ignite war. Ri Won-gil is an editor at a publishing company. I asked him about President Trump's claim that North Korea is a failed state where most live in poverty, drawing a stark contrast to their neighbors in the South.
Why do you think that South Korea's economy is so much larger than North Korea's? Do you agree with President Trump that it's your government's policies that are to blame?
He knows nothing at all about this part of the country, he says. Here we have free education, housing, medical care. Ri was raised an orphan. His parents died serving the government. Now he has a cushy job in the showpiece capital. The United Nations says most North Koreans live without regular electricity, clean water, and nutritious food.
What about people who don't live here in Pyongyang, people who live out in the countryside?
We're building our economy, even under the sanctions and economic blockade by the Americans, he says. And even in Western countries, there's a big difference between life in the capital and small towns. On 17 trips to North Korea, I've never heard anyone criticize the government. There is zero tolerance for dissent of any kind. Defectors testifying to the UN often paint a much darker picture of life inside North Korea. But here, no deviation from the party line. They say this country is not hell, it's home.
And, of course, all of those interviews conducted with government guides standing with us. It is noteworthy and really remarkable that in 17 visits, not a single word of dissent ever spoken to me as a visitor of this country. The North Koreans would say that's because people just don't feel dissent. North Korean defectors, though, say that anybody who did express a view that opposes the government would face very severe punishment. Michael Amro?
You know, they're not allowed to speak out, and they know the consequences of that if they did. Will Ripley, thank you so much in Pyongyang.
Thanks, Will. Let's take a close